Hello again, and welcome to the next episode of Outcomes. I'm your host, Barrett King. And with me today is a friend. I've known Al for quite some time. He was longtime HubSpot. We did some work together there. And now he's leading the marketing and really the collective partnerships charge over at Jasper, which if you haven't heard, super innovative, super cool technology. We'll talk about that in a minute here. But first and foremost, my friend, welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. We've had some great conversations, certainly off recording, right off the show, around how you've really established what I think is a beachhead in terms of defining partner market fit and building a program around value and the way that you use the platform that you all have developed to augment the way that agencies and solution partners actually go to market. So if you could level set for us first and foremost, I usually ask a different question first, but I think it's important to give context for the listener. What is it that you do? What is Jasper? What does it do at a high level for me?
Yeah, so Jasper is an AI co-pilot for marketing teams. Folks that have used us in the past or probably in the past year or so probably notice as a copywriting tool very similar to like a ChatGPT that's powered by generative AI. Since the explosion of AI, we have, moved into a straight focus or a niche around marketing teams and solving for the marketing use case. So what that means is, building functionality that marketers care about, allowing Jasper to be a tone to like a brand tone or a voice. And soon we're releasing some functionality that allows you not to produce just like content faster, but also better. So we're going to have metrics and insights that pull into Jasper. So as you're leveraging it to produce marketing at scale that's on brand and on tone, it'll also let you know how it's performing to further train the Jasper engine. So we're really, solving for that use case of what marketing teams care about using the power of generative AI.
That's so cool. I love the idea of the capturing of the voice. You talked about obviously owning the brand in some ways. There's just something fascinating about that. So it feels like more than ever, this question is relevant to you. It's the first question I typically ask. And that is, what does partnerships mean to you?
Yeah. So when I look at partnerships, I've been on both sides, like tech and, channel referral agency partnerships. It really is just this mutual extension of what an organization does to reach, joint success. When organizations are starting to build a partner practice or thinking about where partners fit in, I really just have them think about them as an extension of your own teams. Referral partners and service partners being an extension of your go-to-market teams on the service side or your sales side, and with tech partners, an extension of your product team. They help you scale in ways that you wouldn't be able to on your own. So that's what it means to me. For sure.
Yeah, I like that last piece. They help you scale in ways that, obviously you couldn't on your own. There's something interesting in thinking about how it adds leverage and it adds opportunity within the model itself. As you've started your early go-to-market with Jasper, and this is obviously what we're going to focus on today, how much of that definition played into the way that you've architected what you've described as like your beta, almost your experimentation, which I love, by the way. I've talked about sort of aligning this idea of early partnerships as the scientific method. You form a hypothesis, you run experiments, you document, you iterate. So I'm intrigued by this idea. So how much then of that, the concept, if you will, you described here, that it should add to your go-to-market, it should create lift in the business and really do the things you can't, do the unscalable things. How much of that did you take into account then, building the program early on?
Quite a lot. Honestly, I took a look at, how are our customer success teams working with customers, and not just like how they're serving customers and, the use cases that they fulfill in terms of like implementation, support, and onboarding, but also the gaps, right? Because that gives me a clear understanding of where partners can kind of fit in and help with the long tail. Same thing, on the integration side, as I work with our strategic integrations team, it's like taking a look at, what the customer cares about, what we could build ourselves, and where we think the ecosystem could play a role. And then, taking the principles that we use in terms of providing value to the customer, whether it be on the CS side or on the product side, and replicating those for the partner and hold them to the same standards. So in the early days, just taking a look at the blueprints that we built on the direct side and figuring out how we could take those learnings and those frameworks and basically extend them to the partners as we start to build those first principles.
I love the idea of copy paste. It's cool that you brought that up. I think I've talked about it in the show before, but the idea of using the existing blueprint that you already know works, and it's not perfect in terms of alignment. You may have to modify it, change some language, the way it's delivered. But ultimately, like if you know something works at its core, then carbon copying that at minimum over to the partner team and sharing those resources and learnings is invaluable. As you've thought about that early on in terms of the transfer of knowledge, how much of it is, I would describe as like in the weeds, grassroots, you on a phone call saying, this is the same playbook, let me read it out to you, versus I've been asked the question before of, do you have to re-architect everything? Do you have to redesign it to meet a partner persona? I'm curious for your feedback on that.
I don't think it's I don't think it's like re-architecting like from the ground up. I think there is a lot of, you take what exists, you get in front of partners, and you get the reaction. And I've been of the mindset, especially at this at this go here at Jasper, to find a small select group of partners or the organization you want to partner with and prove out like some early wins. I think a lot of times organizations will start and they'll try to bring on as many partners as possible just to show that there's traction. But I think at the end of the day, what you really just want to figure out is like, what is the core value proposition that these partners are going to find with you, with the customer, and with their businesses, and then start to replicate that. And you can take what's worked pretty well for your direct teams and get partners to react to it. But you want to start, pretty deliberately and uncovering, what that's going to be with a couple of select few partners, and then modifying it, and then starting to go. So that's kind of been the process to date. It's like, how can we kind of define at least the V1 of the playbook that works well, and then start to look at what scale looks like after that.
Yeah, I like that ideology. Let's talk about that actually. So how are you then looking at defining that small core group? I think it's important to highlight that because, to your point, a lot of folks say, go wide, right? Just get as many as you can, and folks will win and folks will lose, and you'll look at the ones that win and repeat that. And I've heard that from a lot of folks, especially early on in designing a program, versus you're talking about a much more focused, tactic and being more intentional around who you engage in those first, call it 6 months, a year, whatever. How did you define those folks? What criteria did you use to identify your early adopters?
Yeah, so with generative AI, it's a little funky too because it's such a fast moving space where I think partners and partner organizations that are bringing this to their clients, like a lot of times they're just a little bit behind in terms of like, an organization like Jasper where we're trucking ahead. And some organizations like that are service providers or our potential partners are kind of looking at all the options out there, feeling it out and trying to figure out which way to go. So there's not a lot of early adopters who have done it and done it well and shown a lot of returns. So it's really hard to like, say like if those are our ideal partners, like those are the ones we're going to pick and we want to replicate that because in the space of generative AI, it's just moving so fast, like the train's already far down the tracks. So with this particular like group and who I was trying to figure out who'd be a good fit, I really just looked at, who serves our ideal customer and kind of worked our way back from there, like company size, industry, all that good stuff. And then just found the core group of partners, regardless of their proficiency with generative AI, just based on that, because I realized like we're at this phase where, it's such a new like thing.
Yeah,
it's really hard to figure out who would be a good fit for it. So I kind of got a relatively small swath of partners. There's around 30 or, as part of this group, but a wide range as long as they served our, our ideal customer type, and just kind of worked from there.
Yeah. And it's smart to think about them as malleable, I think, in some ways. So I expect as you looked at these businesses and the personas of the folks you'd work with, I imagine, I don't want to feed this to you, but like you've identified folks that are willing to say, sure, we'll flex to you and we'll design it together, right? So as you're capturing all this early input, as you've got these roughly 30 different businesses that are doing the work that you're ideally trying to programatize and scale and such, how are you then capturing what's working? And like maybe you talk about measurement, maybe you talk about the tools that you're using, but just I'm curious holistically, how are you taking these early learnings and mechanizing them into something that maybe not scalable immediately, but at least it's documented and it's shareable and you can then go back and use that to build something with more foundation?
Yeah, to me, it's looking at the customer wins, like the customer wins being the partner client customer.
Yeah, that's great.
Because if we can show that a customer has been, served generative AI in Jasper in such a way that they're successful and it's been brought through like on behalf of a partner that we've worked with, that to me is just like the holy grail. Like one or two of those stories just is like proof of concept, like this can work. So taking a look at some of the early customers that our partners have brought on show like the success that they've had, and then bring it back and look with the partners and be like, okay, how did they do this? How did they bring it to them? And moreover, how are partners starting to evolve to position themselves as like generative AI powered organizations
Mm.
as part of that process. So I think the first like layer is just like, have they just brought this to a customer as we would have? And is it a successful engagement? And then kind of working your way back up, it's like, okay, now how are they kind of positioning themselves and bringing themselves to market as an AI powered service provider that's leveraging Jasper is doing this. So that's like that second part is like phase two. And we're starting to see that with some of the, the partners that were in this first group and those that are joining our program as we officially launch it on November 30th.
That's cool. And super exciting. In context of the soon to be launch, right? So what are some of the, I'll put you on the spot here, forgive me, but what are some of the things that you learned that you would advise somebody to not do, right? So like usually I talk about wins and positives and how you've done really well in some context, because I like the audience to hear tactical things they can deploy in their own opportunity. I want to hear the opposite in some ways, which is like in the last 6 months, 9 months that you've been doing this, as you built your foundation, what are some of the pitfalls that you either didn't avoid or maybe you did that you could share in terms of like, was it going all in on perhaps a bad fit partner or a series of partners? Was it not moving fast enough on the way that you ideate against, something in the go to market? Like, I'm just curious if anything is top of mind as you think about pitfalls and things to avoid.
I think number one is just to not set like incredibly ambitious like goals early on, especially when it pertains to partnerships. As anybody listening to this knows, like they just take time. I use the analogy of like, with direct, like you can get an apple tomorrow, but with partnerships, you plant an apple seed and you get a tree in about a year with a bunch of fruit, right? So it's not like that quick like return. You're not getting the apple right away, but if you nurture it and you work on it, it has just outsized returns down the road. So I think always just having that frame of mind and, working with cross-functional teams as you're getting off the ground to set those right expectations that like partner programs just take time, right? Like you need to find the value proposition. You need to understand how it's going to align with your existing go-to-market team so there's no channel conflict. You need to test and iterate and, get those wins and then start to scale. And it takes a while. And I think folks that aren't privy to how partnerships work can expect like to just move as fast as the direct team would.
Sure.
But you need to kind of create that expectation that it takes a while, but it has outsized like returns once you do. And to the learning, I wouldn't like be like, we're going to get like 30 channel deals like once this is off the ground, like right away or something like that. That's like, that's the wrong expectation to set. I'm not saying that I set like a super ambitious goal like that, but I get ahead of myself sometimes. I'm like, I think we could do this by then. And then I'm like, ooh, maybe that was just like, there's so much work that needs to be done. So being like very thoughtful and deliberate about the process and then setting those right expectations up front is important.
Yeah. So I hope you don't have that copyrighted with the Apple thing. So I'm going to steal that. It's a really good analogy. I love analogies anyways, but I'm picturing like, the leader that's like, hey, I want a piece of fruit. And you're like, cool, I can go to the grocery store and buy 5 or 6 apples. And like you spend a lot of money on those apples and they're not the best perhaps because they've been in transport from wherever in the world. And like, okay, it's still an apple. Or you can say like, cool, that's fine. Somebody else can get those apples for you. I just planted 5 seeds. And to your point, within a year, I've got a tree and it yields, some fruit there. And then year 2, it's even more, and year 3, et cetera, from there. Yeah. How much then is we'll use the analogy here. Is it about like the fertilizer specifically, the water specifically, like the things that give nutrients to the tree versus like giving it just enough of an environment to grow in, right? So like how much of it is it in your early learnings here that you can influence through input the way that the tree grows, almost exclusively perhaps, versus planting it in a really good area with like healthy soil and maybe a good rain pattern or whatever you want to analogize there. So does that make sense in terms of how I'm asking? Like, I think it's both ends of the spectrum. And I'm curious I don't talk to a lot of folks that are building hands-on right now. So are you driving a lot of this or are the partners themselves showing you where to go? That's probably what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a dance. I think what's challenging, especially in the generative AI space, is a lot of this is just brand new to them. And I think this is what throws a wrench in the equation. I think if this was any other thing than this emerging technology, it'd be a little bit different. So there's like this big, like upfront challenge of, where does generative AI fit into my service model? Do things need to change? Yes, they do. Like pricing probably needs to change, how we position it, how we train our teams. There's just so much like upfront work that like kind of is on our shoulders to kind of like figure out in collaboration with the partner. But I think we really need to have like a firm point of view and be able to enable and coach and guide them through this. On the flip side, like even though it's challenging, I think we're going to have an outsized competitive advantage if we crack this nut, figure it out, and shepherd them through this evolution. Because nobody else out there is doing this right now.
Yeah.
Especially with all the generative AI like talk that's going on, nobody's like really just figuring out how this works for service providers and providing them like the program, the platform to actually enablement. A lot of education ideas out there, but like nobody's really programatizing it. So it's a really cool opportunity. But to answer your question, like it's just a lot of work on our end to figure out. Not to say that partners don't bring a lot to the table with their insight, their feedback, and their
Sure.
input, but I just think generative AI has this just outsized learning curve. How does this evolve my organization type of stuff going on that we really need to help figure out?
Well, yeah, you're creating a category. And I think in that category creation becomes, there is inherently an opportunity to ideate on where this goes. I was interviewed, this is a long while back, but Jared and Isaac over at Near Bennett asked a question to me on their show around how does specifically AI in general, generative AI, actually impact agencies, right? And how does that change the way partner programs have to evolve? And I certainly, I think I mentioned you guys there a few times in my response, but the TLDR, the long and short of it is, I think there's an opportunity. I'm curious for your feedback so far in your own learnings. I think there's an opportunity for brands to develop, for agencies to develop their own brand voice using Jasper and then own that in the way they deliver it at scale for, to, through their customers into the market. And I'm wondering how, as you've thought about early program development, how much of this is, IP centric development of a voice versus the augmentation of an existing brand's ability to deliver XYZ value.
Yeah. I mean, I'm completely aligned with it. I think there's like, I would distill it down to like three core components that service providers need to think about with generative AI. The first is like just getting crisp on where the AI powered components of service delivery are and where the human led irreplaceable ones are around brand strategy, around creative, around business strategy, and getting very like explicit about those, being able to position and communicate them to prospects, your existing clients, so they're very aware. And then just figuring out how like pricing shakes out with that, especially when like a tool is part of that service offering. I think that's one. It's just like, how are you going to use generative AI, whether you're like implementing it and coaching a client to do it, if you're building the content on the client's behalf, like just getting super crisp on that. The second part is to what you're saying is there's so much ancillary value that creative agencies, marketing providers can offer in this world of generative AI that is irreplaceable with like building a brand tone and a voice and helping organizations do that. Now that like content proliferation is like going to be a thing and it's going to be a lot easier to do composition, it's going to be so much more important now to put a ton of effort and value into defining a creative, unique brand voice, a unique point of view. And I think these service providers, these agencies, these partners can really dig down into it.
I really
and
like
then
that.
I think the third thing is that there's now going to be this value transfer. Generative AI is going to free up a ton of time and a ton of effort across an organization. And you're probably going to be able to charge the same amount because you're going to be able to move efficiently and create high impact work at a faster clip. So now I think service providers have to think about like, I have all these calories freed up. How do I reinvest that back into the business in certain areas so that I can grow? And that's like the third part of this. So I think there's like those three components that are going to be like the transformation playbook for them that I'm like really excited about. But to your point, yes, like that is a very big opportunity for sure.
It's such a good picture to paint. I appreciate that, those three components. And I'm picturing now, like if I'm a partnership leader and I'm listening to this last piece of the segment, what I'm hearing and probably immediately thinking about is like, how do I lean into that in my own ecosystem? For all of the folks that are listening that work with agencies, work with SIs, folks that generate and engage in that content space, I imagine there's an opportunity to layer in their own program into how your solution and others like it can actually help them to augment the output of that program, help them to add more value to the customer base. So as a parting thought, I'm curious if you have anything top of mind on how to layer those two components, almost like a two-part partner program in that sense. I've got my platform and I've got my partners, and how do I empathize with or work more effectively with organizations like yours, Al, to make sure that our partner program adds value alongside with and through to yours. So recognizing we work with the same type of partner, all of us can collectively go to market more effectively to help that customer.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think first and foremost, as long as you solve for the customer, you'll be able to solve for the partner. I think in the case of how we're kind of building this is, I think we got a pretty good idea of how to solve for the customer, but in the same vein, like there's so much that's fundamentally changing about the partner like business model that we need to like invest more there. I don't think that's different from other partner programs. And I recommend like, I think generative AI is a unique, like emerging category. You got to figure it out. But I think as I look at partner programs, there's not enough done there to be like, how is this really like solving for like, what do partners really care about? Like, as long as you solve for the customer and know what's going on there, then take it a step up and be like, are we really solving for the partner? Is this going to like help them improve their margins, become more efficient, et cetera? Because I think sometimes like you can kind of miss the mark on that. But I think the two step there is like solve for the customer, understand what they need, and then layer that up and figure out how that fits into solving for the partner. And there may be some adjustments that you need to do there to, figure it out. But yeah, that's my take.
That's great. Oh, this has been an awesome conversation, man. Interesting and unique and different. I'm excited to watch what you all do as you grow the program. If folks in the audience here listening want to reach out, they want to join the program, they want to learn from you, how do they find you on the internet? How do they get in touch?
Yeah, so jasper.ai/partners/solutions. That's the solution partner program. You could learn more about it there. If you want to, see how we're building this thing. You could also reach out to partners@jasper.ai if you want to get in touch with me or the team to learn more.
Sweet. Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining, my friend. I appreciate the insight. Folks, as always, thank you for listening. We appreciate you liking, subscribing, commenting. And I always say this, and I genuinely mean it. I love the outreach that I get on LinkedIn. I appreciate your feedback and, obviously willingness to help the guests and the audience alike. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. This has been another episode of Outcomes. I'm your host, Barrett. And Al, it's been a pleasure, man. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Barrett.